Hey everyone, it's Jose, and here are going to be my thoughts over the Vivo X90 series of phones. This is going to be basically what I've been doing since my previous videos, which is just covering the camera tech, looking at their camera samples, and just evaluating whether, these cameras are competitive compared to the likes of the new Xiaomi 12s Ultra and the Huawei Mate 50 Pro phone, because I really enjoyed those phones. And this is a phone, the X90 phones are a line of phones I've been waiting practically throughout the year. The Vivo X80 phones came out a few months ago, but once we knew about the likes of this phone potentially having a one inch sensor and stuff like that, I was like really excited because I really like how Vivo captures their photos. So yeah, let's go over that. So basically, I want to start off with a question that the speaker basically asked the audience. Very straightforward question is that, well, basically, audiences like us, consumers, have been basically asking who has the best computing engine for smartphone photography when, well, as the speaker says, we should be asking ourselves who has the best hardware. Now, in a way, I think a good way to put it is if you're looking for the best photos, you kind of have to look for the best computing engine that is basically going to use whatever hardware, but it's going to give you really reliable photos in any basically photo environment and basically on the sensors. Like you may have a pretty good main sensor, but a lackluster ultra wide. But if you have really good computing software, then that ultra wide can be just as good as maybe a more premium ultra wide, right? But on the other hand, who has the best hardware? Well, in a way, the best hardware right now for a main sensor is just that IMX 989 1 inch type sensor, right? So I don't know. It's just a question that kind of somewhat resonated with me or made me a little bit curious about answering that question in full. So in a way, who has the best hardware, who has the best computing engine. It's up to you whether you want either or, because the Xiaomi 12s Ultra with that IMX 989 does take really nice photos, but the processing on that photos are not really good because it's kind of moody. It's really sort of more grungy than usual with the dark shadows, but yeah, that's the 12s Ultra for you. But yeah, best computing engine, best hardware. Yeah, I guess it really is up to you to decide which one you want. Another thing I kind of want to go over is just the design of a phone because basically I take that into consideration when looking into phones and stuff like that. Um, I think that the design of a phone, especially with brands like Xiaomi, Vivo, especially Huawei, Huawei's my favorite, is that they have really nicely designed phones. Now with my Huawei P30 Pro, hopefully you can see that. This breathing crystal basically design with the blue and purple. I love it. That's one of my main considerations of purchasing this phone. And with these Vivo X90 phones, basically the inspiration for these phones is that the sun or the sun's radiance and its spherical shape basically inspired to be uh, the camera bump, which is right here. Come on. The camera bump is basically the sun, and the leather, it has real or vegan leather, which looks really nice. It almost practically looks like a car interior. In fact, the whole Vivo X90 phones, especially the red ones, remind me a lot of the Huawei Mate Porsche RS phones because I think most of them have leather. At least maybe one iteration of those Mate phones had leather, but yeah, these phones are really nice. I like the inspiration for these phones. I like the colors. There's red, there's a black, and then there is a crystal ice. That's the black. And then this crystal ice, basically design really nice. So yeah, I do really like the design of these phones. Now on to actual camera stuff. Basically, their partnership with Zeiss. Well, it's more on Sony's side this time, but Sony has developed some sort of software, or maybe even to the hardware level as well, is that they're basically changing the light spectrum of red, green, blue, RGB, so that it's more balanced, because the way light, basically the visible light spectrum works, is that some wavelengths will be more visible than other wavelengths. So here in this example, you can see that the green wavelength isn't on an equal level as blue and red, with red basically being really hard to capture because of its, I guess, shorter uh, light spectrum. It might be actually higher. But basically what they're doing is that they're leveling all the wavelengths so that it's basically visually pleasing to the human eye. I have no idea if that's going to work, but on just a surface level, it does sound more interesting, because they also have Zeiss natural colors, which is somewhat unrelated to that. Basically, the Sony partnership, but if it works, it works. The more the merrier. But I guess if this seems like an easy fix to bring to other phones, because Sony develops all the sensors, and a lot of smartphones use Sony sensors. So if it's a hardware thing or a software thing, it seems really easy to port to, let's say, a Xiaomi phone as an example. Now, I will cover more camera things in a moment, but something that I really like about these lines of phones is their focus on tilt shift photography. Now, I won't necessarily explain how it works in full, but it's just a series of techniques on the hardware level that basically lets you make any picture look miniature-like, right? And it has a lot of bokeh. It has a lot of, you know, uh, basically very strong bokeh. But yeah, basically these X series of phones, the X90 phones, I would really like to see how well they can pull off tilt shift, because tilt shift on these phones is software based, not hardware based. But even so, even with software based, you can achieve pretty good results like you see here. Now, what makes this really interesting is that this was taken, I believe, on the ultra wide and not a telephoto or the main sensor. So if you can use tilt shift on the ultra wide sensor and it comes out like this, like that looks pretty good. I would love to use it. However, it's not perfect. As you can see, a little bit piece right here of this flag looks improperly cut out, or just stands out for some reason. I'm pretty sure, well, the roll off here looks fine, but in some areas, I guess in the back of the trunk, it looks a little bit soft. But overall, for being an ultra wide, it looks really good. The vehicles right here, the pedestrians, even the street itself looks miniaturized. And that's pretty good. I do love it. Now we have moved to the Vivo X90 Pro Plus, which is the best phone out of this line, with the Vivo X90. That's the base model, the Pro, and then the Pro Plus. So something that they basically brought up with this phone, the Pro Plus, is that about 98% of their survey respondents, or whatever test study they did, is that a lot of them use telephoto. And whether that's true or not, 98% is a lot. It's a very high, basically, majority for people who prefer telephoto or extensively use telephoto. Like, I extensively use telephoto. That's why I got the P30 Pro, or at least that's what I learned from using the P30 Pro, is that telephoto is awesome. So this camera, or this phone, does have two telephoto systems, which I will talk about in a moment. But basically the highlight of this phone is, as you can see right here, a huge, well, huge, even though I don't think it's that big, is a 1-inch type sensor on the Vivo X90 Pro Plus. which debuted on the Xiaomi 12S Ultra. That gave us nice results. I thought the tuning of those photos were, again, really moody, really grungy, really dark. But hopefully with Vivo's processing, it comes out to be well utilized. If I'm going to trust anyone with a 1-inch type sensor, it could be Google or it could be Vivo, but in my opinion, I'd rather go with Vivo. I'd rather trust them with the processing because you'll see in a moment, but their processing is really nice, especially for night photos. Okay, so they're gonna do a lot of comparisons right now on basically, as you can see, iPhone 14 Pro Max versus Vivo X90 Pro Plus. So just based off this photo, yeah, Vivo's photo is better, not because it's brighter, but because the presentation of the photo is just a lot more balanced, because the iPhone photo is just, it's too dark, but not only that, but it doesn't really look that visually pleasing, because you can have a dark photo that is visually pleasing as opposed to always having the brighter photo be the better photo. But in this example, it's just clear to me that the Vivo X90 Pro Plus, which is with its processing and sensor, is just a better photo. And then we'll skip a few because they have a lot of photos right here. HDR is really big on this phone. I will explain that later, but just basically looking off this photo, HDR is going to be really huge. And something that's really nice on this phone is that with video, keep in mind, this is video, not photo, but video, is that they're basically processing HDR, extra dynamic range, and stuff like that. Is that neon lights and any sort of light sources that normally would be clipping on any camera, it doesn't matter if it's a phone or a real SLR, is that clipping of light sources just naturally happens. It just happens. But because of their processing and also in part of having that Zeiss lens coating, which I will talk about later, is that you get really nice results with really clear, like, again, light sources, neon lights, stuff like that. You can clearly see, well, at least see it a lot better on the Vivo as opposed to the iPhone, especially with this. I don't know if this is a barber light or it's just a regular light, is that it's blown out here, but you can see that it's yellow. So that's pretty good. That's why I like Vivo phones, because of processing like this. So this Vivo phone is equipped with an anti-shake gimbal system on one of the sensors. I think it's the 2x portrait lens. And it's just better than OIS because it's, like I said, gimbal-like. So it just corrects more extreme hand movements, whether that's still competitive with what the iPhone 14 phones did with their anti-shake stuff. I don't know, but I'm just gonna assume from the Vivo X70 and Vivo X80 phones that this anti-shake is just, just good. And something that's also cool is that they're messing with the exposure bias or exposure compensation for night photos, which I guess, I don't know why it's a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise that, they always mess with the exposure bias, because how else do you get really good dynamic range on, the Vivo phones when there's a light source taken with night mode and stuff like that in a dark environment, where you have this just really nice, as Ben's Gadget Review says, uncanny HDR. And it is true. It's really uncanny. It's really impressive how good the HDR is. So with this -8 points of exposure bias for night photos, for astrophotography, that's going to be the highlight of this phone, is that it's astrophotography, that it's handheld. I don't know how many seconds it's going to take for astrophotography. It has to be at least 30 seconds, but with the gimbal system and with all of their software processing, the astrophotography is going to be phenomenal in this phone. At least that's what I think, but I'm really rooting for this phone for really good astrophotography. And then you see right here, Vivo X80 Pro versus Vivo X90 Pro. I don't know why the Vivo X80 Pro is that dark. That seems like a drastic comparison. I don't know if they're talking about the ultra wide or the main sensor or something, but or portrait lens, but the Vivo X80 Pro is just way too dark, way too soft. The X90 Pro Plus is obviously a lot better in a lot of different ways with saturation, brightness, detail, stuff like that. But yeah, it's just that this astrophotography mode is going to be really good. So if we skip a little bit forward, yep, here we go. It's nice. Slow motion photography. I hope it's as good as the Huawei phones and the Xiaomi 12S Ultra, because if you can pull stuff like just like, I don't know, just take a photo or a few photos and it comes out like that, where something as, I don't know, something like liquid just spilling all over the place, but you can capture it in action as it hits the surface, that would be really cool. And then we have telephoto systems, which I will say HDR, really good, really like it. More photos, all really nice. As you can see, the whole action sequence thing where, you know, stuff is happening. You have birds flying, people jumping, animals jumping, someone hitting a bag of ice or a water balloon of ice, dropping something, an ice cube into a cup of water, popping a balloon, all of this stuff. I wish more phones had stuff like this, or at least have more extreme capturing of slow motion events. Well, not slow motion itself, but, you know, capturing something in an instant with a really fast shutter speed and stuff with a really big 1-inch type sensor is going to help you out with that, because they have more dynamic range and stuff like ISO or dynamic range or stuff like that, is that you can actually afford to have these really fast photos with a really fast shutter speed because of the, you know, the huge sensor size. Well, it's not that huge, but for a phone, it will do for now. And right now we're gonna see a few more of this tilt shift. As you can see, first of all, the cinematic pan or that aspect ratio is really nice. I know these phones have had this in the before. I don't know what they call it. Cinematic aspect ratio or whatever Vivo calls it. There's a lot of ways you can call this. But it looks really nice. It looks miniature. It looks like a freaking mini golf set. It looks really nice. They also have, oh, by the way, that depth of field, like that roll off is really good. Really good detail. And I guess they want to contribute Zeiss, because they have Zeiss logo right here that, oh yeah, our Zeiss coding, our Zeiss lenses and color calibration and whatever else they have done is basically contributing to these basically great photos. And I will like to say that the Vivo and Zeiss partnership is my favorite partnership out of all the partnerships in the past, whether it be Huawei Leica or Xiaomi Leica or Oppo/OnePlus with Hasselblad, is that this Vivo and Zeiss basically collaboration is my favorite based off the results that we get just off of the Zeiss coding and the Zeiss natural colors mode, because, well, the natural colors mode is a little bit, I don't know, too low saturated, more that it doesn't seem that natural. But the coding for HDR and stuff like that, that's like the highlight of Vivo phones in partnership with Zeiss, is that uncanny HDR, probably because of that coding. As a small contributor or half the contributor, but not completely, because a lot of it is post-processing, as we discussed with that negative exposure bias. But yeah, Zeiss and Vivo, I've said it before, but I keep saying it, it's my favorite. Here's the photo we have with the 90mm telephoto, and it looks nice. I just came here to say that the angle is good, the photo itself is good, with the colors. The saturation is not too over the top, which is nice because you can really feel that the warmth in this photo. You can feel its sort of radiance in a little bit because of the sun. It's really nice. Colors are really nice. I also wanted to talk about the cutout. The cutout for this photo is relatively good. You can see it did mess up right here with this glass space just a little bit, but for being a 90 millimeter basically photo, this is good. This is really good for cutting out subjects, complex subjects. It's not just this person right here. It's also stuff in the foreground. The floor is part of the foreground as well. I can't tell because of the subtitles, but it looks to be pretty good. The door itself, a little bit janky, but not too much. But overall, I look at this photo and say, yeah, this is pretty good. And this is what I like Vivo phones as well as is their portraits. I think they take really nice portraits. We have a few more portraits here. You have, I don't know what this Zeiss basically lens effect is supposed to be called. I don't think it's I don't even know what it's called. Diagons? I don't even know what it's called. But this Zeiss lens where it does a little bit of a warping effect in conjunction with having these discs. Really nice. Cutouts really nice. Colors are nice as well. HDR is nice. With this photo as well, this is taken with a 90 millimeter. You can sort of tell it was taken with longer focal range. The cutout's nice. A little bit interesting with the bokeh. It's not that strong. I'm pretty sure that's just based off the photo settings that the photographer used, where you could have used a stronger bokeh, but this little somewhat shallow depth of field is pretty shallow. It works out to be pretty well. These photos, this one doesn't look too much of a, well, it's a portrait, but it doesn't have too much bokeh. Really nice. I really like the colors with the red here. HDR as well. I'm pretty sure the sun is behind this person just based off this glow. You do have a little bit of lens flare, which could be part of creative intent or photographer's intent, but I would assume that with that Zeiss coating that there would be basically minimal lens flare, but I think it looks nice with the lens flare either way. This portrait, 50 millimeter, that's really nice. The cutouts are looking pretty good with this basically fence. But overall, these colors look really well. I really like how portraits come out with this phone. And then we have a basically 64 megapixel 3x sensor. I'd have to check the specifications again, but it's a 3x sensor that can take up to 100x zoom, digital zoom. 3.5x, yeah, that makes sense. It looks good for being 100x, but of course, with any telephoto system we have right now, even with a 10x telephoto system on the Samsung S22 Ultra, is that if you go to 100x, you're really pushing the boundaries of it. But of course, I think, I wouldn't say people neglect 100x zoom, because if I had on my P30 Pro, I might use it a few times, even though I already know 50x is already pushing it for the 5x periscope. But what I like about having the option for 100x digital zoom on, let's say, a 5x telephoto sensor. You just have a 5x telephoto sensor that can go all the way to 100x digital zoom. What I like is that sometimes I just want to take a photo where I am physically unable to move. And I think this setting of having basically, I don't know if you're on a boat or if it's another piece of land that the photographer is on, but just having a body of water that you can't really move and you want to take a photo of something on shore. So like the city. So from 1x, you can clearly see that there's a huge body of water. There's no way you can walk on water and get closer to your subject. And even so, it's really far away. That'll take you a while to get there. So from 1x to 20x to 100x, you're really close to whatever you couldn't take a photo of because you couldn't physically move closer. Now, this 10x and 20x photo will suffice basically as the final picture where you don't need to be closer. Like this 20x photo, it's good enough. You can clearly see whatever it is you wanted to see, which is the banner. And even after the fact, you take a photo at 20x, you can just literally go on your gallery and pinch to zoom in, and that will be basically good enough. But having this 100x digital zoom, yeah, it's really soft. It's color painting like because it has no detail, but they are doing a remosaicing, basically new technology for their telephoto systems because as the survey said, according to Vivo, that more than 98% of people like taking telephotos. So having this remosaicing technology and putting it into the telephotos, like that's better than not having it in most situations. But yeah, I guess this is what allows Vivo phones to now take 100x digital zoom, and it has a 64 megapixel 3.5x telephoto camera, so that's also part of being able to do 100x. But I don't know, I think having the option to have it, it's a little bit misleading because it's not that good. But I don't know, this suffices. Honestly, it could have been way worse. I would like to see what the S22 Ultra doesn't compare for 100x and 20x, but just looking at these photos, like they look good, and that's it. They look good. So yeah. And just something that's really quick is that one of the main reasons you buy a Vivo X80 or X90 phone, besides for portraits, is that you take advantage of basically the whole telephoto system, ultra wide system, gimbal system, and is that you make basically videos with them. Like let's say you wanted to be a filmmaker or record better videos on your phone, I would say one of the first phones you should buy, besides an iPhone, because we're sticking with Android, right, is a Vivo X series of phones because they have, like I said, really good software support and hardware to make these videos. Now I know Xiaomi is really pushing the limits with having better video. Like for example, the Xiaomi 12 phones, not the 12s, but the regular 12 phones, introduce better night performance with elevated dynamic range and lower noise. And from what I saw based off the promos and examples, it is good, but I do not like recording video on a Xiaomi phone based off my trying to record video manually with manual settings on the Poco X3 Pro. Now, maybe the 12 and 12S of phones have a better camera app, like better camera settings, because I know the 12S phones do have a Leica specific camera skin to the software, which does introduce a few features. I don't know if pro settings for video is one of them, but I'm just saying, if I was to buy a Vivo phone, something I really would take advantage of is those manual settings, like 14-bit super raw log video, having ISO, EV settings, stuff like that. That's basic on my P30, the X3 Pro. Like these are basic settings, but just again, having that software support, making it easier to record and log. It's actually very competitive with the Sony Xperia phones on, well, not quite that level of camera control for video and photo, but this is probably the second best, in my opinion, for recording videos on your phone with that expert level of manual control. So if you do buy a Vivo phone, I would suggest to you probably looking into using any one of these features, especially log, if you do want to create more professional and cinema quality or cinema presentation style videos with the Vivo phones. Because honestly, like, these Vivo phones are good for that. When I think of cinema quality video, I think of actually Vivo and Sony because of that control, but Vivo's one of them as well. That's basically my top two. So yeah. Okay, something I don't really understand with this phone is that basically it has the main sensor, the IMX989 is 23 millimeters. You have a 64 megapixel, 90 millimeter telephoto. Then you have a 50 millimeter telephoto, right? And a 48 megapixel ultra wide. Now, what I don't get is that since the 23 millimeter basically wide, how that translates to a 90 millimeter 3.5x, because just based off simple math, 90 divided by that 23 millimeter, that wide into that the telephoto, is it comes out at almost 4x, 3.9x. But from what I've been seeing everywhere is that it's saying it has a 3.5x optical zoom, but it's 90 millimeter. It doesn't translate that well. I know a lot of phones actually have this problem where being reported in millimeters doesn't actually come out to how the division is based off the wide. So for example, let's see, the P30 Pro, it has a 5x optical periscope camera, but in a way it has in actual millimeter terms or whatever, it has more like a 4.7x instead of a 5x optical. Like that's fine, right? But having a basically being reported as a 3.5x optical when the math says it's higher than that, then that's a little bit concerning. That's half 0.5x of a difference, right? Which might not be too much, but in a way it's like, I don't know. So I'm pretty sure based off the examples I saw is that you go 1x right here, and then that 2x translates to 50 millimeter, which it's not. This would have to be 25 millimeter to be equally 2x at 50 millimeter, but because of sensor sizes and the focal length and whatever, it doesn't equate to that equally. But I don't know. It's just this 90 millimeter that's just throwing me off. But it's not too much of a complaint. It's just I wonder if it necessarily matters millimeter wise, because instead of this being 90 millimeters at 3.5x, what, it's supposed to be like 75 or something. I don't like I'm just saying, like, I hope in actual practice, the 90 millimeter and the 50 millimeter doesn't necessarily matter to the 23 millimeter being, like I said, being equally divided by that 23 millimeter to be that 3.5x or 2x. I'm just saying. It's been throwing me off ever since the leaks. I was like a 2x and a 4x telephoto sensor. I'm like, that's weird. But even so, having a 2x and a 3.5x optical telephoto sensor in this phone, the Pro Plus, is just super weird to me. Because what I really hate about it, or what I really don't understand, is that instead of having a 2x telephoto, why could you not just crop from the IMX989? Just like crop like how Apple and Google crops into the sensor and remosaics all the pixels so that it's like equivalent to being 2x lossless zoom, as an example. Now, part of that reason is that with the 2x telephoto, you do get a gimbal system. I think it's on the 2X. I know the Vivo X90, the gimbal was on the ultra wide, and on the X80, it was on the 2X. So I'm thinking the 2X telephoto has that gimbal system. And that way, it somewhat justifies it, not too much. But what I really don't like is this approach to a 3.5x optical replacing the 5x basically telephoto. Now, on that 5x telephoto on the X80 phones, it was like cheap. It wasn't really that good. It lacked a lot of dynamic range, somewhat made up for by software, but I really didn't like it. So moving to a 2x to another 3.5x telephoto, it's just weird because it's really forcing you to use this phone only for basically portraits, because that's the whole reason you buy an X80, X90 phone, is for specifically portraits. Now, this does help for the portrait photographers out there, but I just really wish we had a 5x telephoto system using this sensor, this 64 megapixel sensor, right? Now, at the same time, I'm really skeptical about portraits on this phone. And the reason I am is that, again, you could have just cropped into the IMX989 for 2x loss and zoom. And I would theorize that cropping into that 1-inch type sensor would be better than this 1/2.4 type inch sensor, right? Because this sensor is, well, I haven't done the math, but I would just assume that quality-wise, the IMX989 would be better. And the 64 megapixel can just be 64 megapixels. That doesn't matter. 3.5x optical, that doesn't matter. But I'm just saying, this could have been 5x. You could have just cropped into the telephoto sensor, and it would have been better because you have basically 3 different sensors for telephotos. So I'm really concerned with the quality of difference between dynamic range and details and stuff like that, and noise reduction, because you have 3 different sensors doing the same thing, all portraits, just at different focal lengths. So I honestly don't know. What I do know is that on the Vivo X90, the base model is that I think it was the 2x telephoto or the ultra wide. I don't remember, but it uses the IMX 89. I don't even remember, 855, 876, whatever it is. It uses an RGBW sensor. At that point, I would have been like, okay, because it uses that specific sensor for better dynamic range, it would be like, maybe instead of cropping into whatever sensor it uses, instead of this 1-inch type sensor, is like, okay, maybe the sharpness will be better and dynamic range will be better because it uses specifically that RGBW sensor. But in this case, I'm pretty sure it doesn't use that sensor. I'm pretty sure it uses a different sensor. So honestly, I don't know. I'm just, again, really confused with this telephoto system on the basis of equivalence of millimeters and not cropping in to the main sensor and having literally a 1.5x difference between both telephoto systems. It seems really redundant. That's how I would describe that telephoto system. Redundant and just confusing. But if it works in practice, if the quality is consistent across all 3 cameras, except the ultra wide, because you don't use the ultra wide for portrait bokeh effects, right? But yeah, I hope it works out. I honestly hope it works out, but it's just really weird on paper. In practice, that's where it actually matters. Now, here's something I really don't understand, right? So this is the X90 Pro Plus, right? It has a quad camera setup, right? It has, I think this one has to be the 1-inch sensor, IMX989. And then this is the 2x. Oh yeah, the 2x has a fixed focus. Yeah, that one made me honestly really confused as well, that the 2x has a fixed focus. So I'm really questionable about the telephoto system, but whatever. If it works in practice, it works in practice rather than being on paper. But I do hate that it does have a fixed focus. So that's the telephoto, that's the telephoto, that's the ultra wide. And then you have apparently a time of flight sensor, which again, if you've been watching this channel, you know I'm really, I guess, passionate, or I like to hype up time of flight sensors whenever I get the chance to. And here I somehow have the chance to do it again. It has a time of flight sensor listed on here, but I don't see it. I literally don't see the time of flight sensor. Now I was thinking this is the time of flight sensor, when no, that looks to be like a microphone or something, or it's the laser autofocus, because it says time of flight sensor laser autofocus, which basically are two different things. They're not the same thing. They're used for similar things. They're used for depth mapping and determining distance between a background and foreground. They work differently though, and they look different too. Sensor-wise, they look different. So I don't see a time of flight sensor at all, but this could be, again, a microphone or that laser autofocus. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up to begin with is that first, this contradicts with each other, because I don't see either. I don't see a time of flight sensor and I don't see a laser autofocus sensor. Unless this is a translation error, because I am translating this to English from Mandarin, so I don't know, but DTOF spelled like that does not seem like a mistranslation. That seems intentional from the Mandarin, actual Mandarin original writing, right? So I don't know. If it has a time of flight sensor, great. I'd honestly praise this phone even more. I really like time of flight sensors. I wish more phones had them. I just don't see it here. I don't see a time of flight sensor. Now, what gets even weirder, it's honestly well, it didn't make me too mad, but it kind of makes me mad. So we have, this is the Vivo X90, and the regular X90 has this as well. Okay, you have your triple camera setup, right? Ultra wide, telephoto, main sensor. What's this right here? I'd assume it's a time of flight laser autofocus sensor. Again, that contradicts because I don't see it. But I was like, yeah, it's a time of flight sensor now. Okay, that's cool. The X90 Pro and the regular X90 have time of flight sensors, but not the X80 Pro Plus. Well, if that is true, I don't know if that's true. I would be like, oh, like you could have put the time of flight sensor on the Pro Plus and make it a penta camera setup and actually make that phone slightly better. Because I do like time of flight sensors. I like how they work. I like the benefits they provide. But then I noticed something. This little microphone or whatever this is still here. So I'm thinking, is this the time of flight sensor and this is the infrared emitter, which a time of flight sensor does need? It needs both the actual camera and the infrared emitter in order for time of flight to work. That's what I was thinking. But then I look at this video right here of the regular X90 base model. You have that sensor right here, but this little cutout of the microphone, whatever that's supposed to be, it's not there. Even the infrared blaster, which is necessary, you need to have the infrared blaster for time of flight to work. It's not here either. It's not here. It's not here. It's not here. It's supposed to be somewhere around this sensor. It's not there. And that doesn't make any sense. And you can see, like, this video is really good. Here, I'll shout it out. Techie Street right here is that this is a really zoomed in shot, which helps my case of analyzing the phone because I don't have the phone. So, and especially this light glare over the camera glass really helps that if you look, like that shine didn't show any additional modules. It didn't show an infrared. It didn't show that microphone. like it's just missing. It's just missing overall. And I don't understand why. So if this isn't a time of flight sensor, and this doesn't look like it's a laser autofocus sensor either. So what is this sensor? I actually have no idea. When I first saw this before coming to this page, I actually got mad thinking it's this sensor right here, which came out on the Huawei Mate 50 phones. You should really go watch that video I have on the Huawei Mate 50 phones, and especially me talking about this sensor, because it's a really misleading sensor. What the sensor is an ambient light sensor slash color temperature sensor. Now, what a color temperature sensor does, it's just basically tells you what the values of the white balance is in a scene. So let's say you were outside, since the sun naturally casts yellow light, your photos are going to be really warm without proper white balance. So this is what this sensor is. It's for white balance. Now, this sensor itself is really cheap, extremely cheap. It takes in extremely little bits of light and just does white balance. It's really cheap. It's really basic, right? And this debuted on the Mate 50 phones. I was like, why, Huawei? Why did you do this? Now you're encouraging other phone companies to put a fake, visually fake quad camera setup, because this is the telephoto main sensor ultra wide, and you would think, oh, this is a camera too. What camera is this? If anyone ever has that question, because the majority of consumers don't question, okay, what cameras are these? No, they don't. They just take photos. Basically, that having this on a $2,000 phone, because it is on the Porsche RS phone, which is $1,800. So having this sensor on that $1,800 Huawei phone encourages others to do the same, to put this cheap color temperature sensor, which I believe barely does anything because it just does white balance. Like, I don't know. That's really confusing. I don't know why you didn't want to put it on the front of the phone where it makes sense. Like the bezels of the phone, you won't be able to see, but basically the bezels of the phone, basically right here. You could have put that sensor right here. But if you have really thin bezels, then it would be really hard to do it. But I'm just saying, you could have put it right there, but you put it on the back. So it's misleading. And that's what I thought this sensor was. It's an ambient light sensor slash color temperature sensor. But actually, I honestly don't know what this sensor is. Like, I looked at the specifications and stuff like that. This is the Vivo X90. It tells you all the specifications, right? But I look at specifically ambient light sensor and color temperature sensor, and it doesn't say it has those sensors. It has a rear chromatographics. Oh, actually, it does have it. Wow, I can't believe I didn't notice that. So, apparently, okay, this infrared remote sensor is the IR blaster, which basically is to control TVs. It's basically right here. So that's not the infrared sensor on the back. So, that's honestly really interesting. So it has a laser focal sensor, which is a laser autofocus sensor, which I guess is this. This isn't a microphone. This is a laser autofocus sensor. But a rear chromatographic sensor. That basically confirms it's a color temperature sensor, which is weird because this sensor is actually bigger on the glass, on the lens, than it is on this one. I know it's really hard to tell because especially since I don't have it for scale, but if you just look right here, super tiny sensor. I told you, it takes in extremely little bits of light. It's like super cheap. And, oh, that's the wrong phone. And it's right here, except it's bigger. So it looks like they're using a bigger color temperature sensor. Now, whether this works or not, I'm really skeptical about it. I'm skeptical about it being on the Huawei phone. I'm skeptical about it being on the Vivo X90 phone. Because look, you have this sensor here, but you don't have the sensor here. It's literally meant to fill up a space. That's what that sensor is. It's like a depth sensor, like a 2 megapixel depth sensor on the Poco X3 Pro. It's meant to take up space than it is meant to do anything valuable. That doesn't mean depth sensors are bad. There are really good benefits to depth sensors, and I have explained that in previous videos before. Depth sensors, of course, calculate depth, but they also boost dynamic range of photos. Now, this isn't a depth sensor. This is a color temperature sensor, auto white balance, right? So I'm just thinking, in what real world scenario does this sensor actually do anything? And the reason I say that is because if you remember what I've been talking about, or what I've said before, with the color optimization they have done with Zeiss and the whole Sony thing where they basically fix the visible light spectrum so it's more equal across red, green, and blue, is that why would you need this sensor? This sensor doesn't need to be here if you have the software you have from Sony and the Zeiss partnership, which is right here. It's not exclusive to the Pro Plus. It's also on the regular X90. So I'm just thinking, when does this sensor actually do anything meaningful? And if having this sensor gives this phone some sort of advantage that the X90 doesn't have because it doesn't have that sensor. So it's really weird that you promote what you did with the color calibration with Sony and Zeiss, but still find a need to put an additional sensor that contributes to a lower end phone, but not the higher end phone. Do you see where I'm going with this? It's basically, it just doesn't make any sense. You already have so much calibration with the colors that if you were to put this sensor on the lower phone, why did it not carry over to the Pro phone, where you're not only are you paying a premium for this phone, but if it helps at all, then why wouldn't it also help on this phone? So why doesn't this phone have it? Now, you could argue that, I don't know, it takes up space and it would make it visually ugly because you have basically a little quad square right here, and you have a little quad square right here, right? So if you were to introduce it, where would you put it? Would you put it in the middle, on the top? Would you make it into a pentacamera setup where everything's realigned or something like that? But then at the same time, the answer to that question, besides making it symmetrical again by rearranging the stuff, is that, well, you put this cheap sensor here to make it symmetrical. That's basically what the Huawei did. You have 3 real cameras, but you put that 4th camera there to make it symmetrical. So basically, this sensor is the new depth sensor. It's just to make the camera symmetrical. That's all this sensor is for. And that's honestly really baffling. Really, 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 really baffling. I can't believe phone companies are going with this now. I honestly... Yep, I answered my question on the freaking recording. I honestly was gonna end off the video saying I don't know what the sensor is, but I guess I missed it. It is a color temperature sensor. That's really baffling. I hate what Huawei has done by precedent by doing this, and now other phone companies are literally copying them. That's honestly really baffling. Like I said in my Huawei Mate 50 Thoughts video, I can't wait for cheap phones like this Poco phone to have that sensor on this phone to make it a penta camera setup. Honestly, that's really funny. But if I was to wish anything besides it actually doing anything meaningful, I do not think it does anything meaningful. There is no way it does anything meaningful with all the calibration you have done with Sony and Zeiss. Is that instead of this being a color temperature sensor. It would have been really cool if it was a time of flight sensor, or better yet, I would have let this slide a little bit if you put it on the X90 Pro Plus. But since it's not here, that also seems misleading and counterintuitive that you give the cheaper phone an assistive sensor when you don't give the Pro phone, the most flagship phone, that same assistive sensor. It's honestly really, really baffling. I do not understand it. Oh, Vivo, what are you doing, man? And just to quickly end this video off, this phone, the Pro Plus phone, comes out to equivalent to about 9,000. I mean, not 9,000, holy crap. 910 US dollars converted to the Chinese currency. I think, well, I guess it's just time for my overall thoughts. Honestly, all of these phones are really nice. Like, the colors are really nice. I really like what they've done with the Zeiss collaboration, with the lens coating. The telephoto system's really weird. It's just really weird. Why does it go from 2x to 1.5x? And why is there even a 2x telephoto if you can just crop in from the main sensor? I honestly have a lot of thoughts on this whole thing, which I already discussed. I'm not going to really reiterate anything other than telephoto system's confusing. It has a 1-inch sensor, 1-inch type sensor, which is good, but yeah, in conjunction with the uncanny HDR, which if Ben reviews this phone, I'm pretty sure he's gonna go crazy with the HDR, especially with that 1-inch type sensor. I can't wait to watch Ben's gadget reviews video basically on this, because I really like what he's done with the Vivo phones. He really shows you what these Vivo phones can do, and that's why I really like about his videos on these phones specifically. So yeah, confusing video, just as confusing as the Xiaomi 12S Ultra video, and still confusing as the Huawei Mate 50 videos. Honestly, we're on a streak. We're on a 3-video streak with all of those reaction videos having some sort of confusing element where I have to call it out because it does not make any sense, or I have a concern for it where this concern actually turns out to be, like, actually have merit and come out to be true. So, yeah, I don't know. I hope you enjoyed the video. Probably came out to another hour again. I honestly didn't think it was going to come out to an hour, but it looks like it might come out to an hour. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video. And next up is the Oppo Find X6, which is leaked to have a 1-inch type sensor, which is good, but that telephoto, I think it has a 2x telephoto, well, leaked. Well, that's gonna suck. Oppo phones are not doing well as OnePlus phones, but overall, I'm happy to have seen and basically make a commentary on the Vivo X90 Pro Plus, because I love this phone. Honestly, this is one of my favorite phones besides the X80 Pro that have come out, because Vivo phones overall, with their camera, with their HDR, with their Zeiss collaboration that gives you Zeiss bokeh effects and all these things. I've talked about a lot of different things with Vivo. I really like Vivo phones, and honestly, I'd really like considering using a Vivo phone in the future, even if it's just a $500, $300 Vivo phone. Honestly, that still give you really good photos. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed the video and have learned something about today, whatever that is, I don't know. But yeah, see you next time. Bye-bye.